Welcome to the Studio 70 podcast. Our goal is for you to join in on real behind-the-scenes conversations about our projects and the people who make them happen. Thank you for joining us.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Studio 70 podcast. Today I'm joined again by our good friend Daniel Grasso.
Hey, Austin. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Last time you were on, I explained to people that you are a very special, honored, I would call you maybe a patron, like a patron saint of Studio 70.
Nice. Thank you. It's an honor to be called a patron without giving any money. So
Yes. Yes.
Hard to get that title, yeah.
In this age of Patreon and
this
patrons
economy,
at the
yeah.
end. So Daniel has read every one of our scripts for our major movies and for Great Trials Chapter 6 and 7. He's given extensive feedback and helped construct those stories and really helped me process how to make them as good as possible. And therefore you'll see his name in the credits of pretty much every project. And your wife used to work at King's Academy as well, though that's not how we met, right?
That's right. She was a friend with Pistol, I think, in one of his she's credited in one of your films.
Hold on. I took a swig of water at the worst time possible. I almost spit it out. Yes, she's friend with handgun in the movie Todd and the Hound. Yes, yeah, amazing performance, truly.
Just an amazing performance, really.
Yeah, but we met in college. Daniel has since gone on to study. You're studying for the PhD in philosophy.
Correct.
And you've narrowed down
my best.
right. You've narrowed down the
proud.
dissertation topic to. Are you comfortable sharing about that yet, or is it not quite locked in?
It's not quite locked in. As of last week. This may be a surprise to you, Austin. This may be the first time.
Oh.
I think it might be on something regarding hope, something on hope and perhaps disability. So that's where we're at right now. Something about hope, well-being, and maybe if I'm lucky, I can make it about friendship as well. Kind of sneak a little bit of that in there. That was my original idea.
It sounds kind of like the plot of Star Wars episodes 4, 5, and 6.
Oh.
You have hope, a new hope. You have a disability in Darth Vader, and you have the friendship
And friends, yeah. Friends.
You have the friends. So good. Your dissertation will be on Star Wars. That's great to hear.
I'm making a trilogy of my dissertation.
But anyway, you're a fan of literature, good literature. You're a fan of good movies, and so I've always trusted your opinion. So it was an honor to send to you the cut of Iron Dusk before anyone else got to see it outside of our community.
Feels so exclusive. The private link.
That's why you're a patron, or that's the reward for your tier 1 patronage. But I guess it would be wrong to say that you were completely, not involved in this project. Help people understand what you did for Iron Dusk.
I'm fortunate enough to talk to Austin on the phone and receive the script far in advance. Usually maybe a couple drafts depending on how far in advance or how many comments I can give back. But so I get to read it, give kind of initial feedback, some story stuff, some nitpicky stuff. And usually if I'm really lucky, I'll have brainstormed something with Austin. Like, I believe Iron Dusk, I remember maybe 2020, something like that, maybe 2021, Austin was like, I see a vision of a medieval knight. His name's Aeneas. And so getting to not just read the script in the first draft or the final draft, but getting to hear Austin's vision as it appears to him in a foggy state, and then working it out. So I'm privileged to hear all about that from the initial inception to the final script. Unfortunately, I'm no longer there in person to hold your boom mic, but
yes, but I still harass you over the phone with ideas and such. And that's true. You did. It's funny. You, me, and Steven as a little trilogy of or trinity of people have made a lot of projects together, actually, with you and Steven acting, or you holding the boom mic and I'm on camera and Steven's in front. So this is yet another Steven, Daniel, and Austin project in a really weird sense, I guess. So yeah, you were definitely instrumental in forming some of the plot points and altering some of the characterization for Aeneas, which we'll get into. But first, to sketch out the battle plan here, I would love to do a spoiler-free section where we talk about the project. You give me your honest feedback, and we dissect it a little bit, and then we'll do the episode will probably break, and then a new episode will continue our conversation into a spoiler section. But first, yeah, so no spoilers for the project. Give us some honest thoughts. You saw it. What did you think? Maybe how did it compare to previous Studio 70 projects? And how does it compare to like real night movies that have a lot more money than us? How did we do?
Yeah, the first thing that struck me, and maybe it's because I'm such a connoisseur of Stephen Hedger media, that I appreciated that Stephen, and not just Stephen, but the tone of the film, but kind of set by Stephen in the protagonist role. The tone was a little bit less goofy, a little bit more serious, but I liked the way he played things, where it wasn't dour, mm-hmm. and it wasn't like taking itself too seriously, but it was just a little bit more mellow, a little bit more straight. Stephen, I think, did a great job of showing, and you did, Austin, like inserting these moments where we see behind the curtain a little bit that he's not just a stoic knight who has no emotion and he's a robot, or he's just out for justice or something, but that there's a beating heart, and there's just softer moments like with the tomato, or I guess I won't spoil that. There's some softer moments with relationship building and seeing behind the curtain. So I really appreciated that Stephen took a different angle, a little bit more muted, but in a good way, a little more restrained maybe. And thinking mm-hmm. back to, I think it's because I'm so used to seeing Stephen in very goofy roles where he excels at that. I think that's his natural kind of wheelhouse. So it's nice to see him do something a little bit, and not just him, but kind of taking the whole film in that direction. I think,
right.
Stephen kind of led it, but you obviously directed it in that way. And I think everyone, a lot like Andre and as the king, I think, mm-hmm. I think he did a great job. He had a little bit of like nicely restrained Tim Curry energy from like Three Musketeers. I really,
that's funny.
Really liked that.
Yeah. This was the first project where I actually wrote up maybe 4 or 5 pages on tone and actually made that available to the actors. I like merged the PDFs of that tone document with the screenplay when I sent it out, and really tried to explain to everybody the desire to do something that feels more like a Western in its grit. Yeah. And we talked a lot about the Middle Ages, and none of us were there, sadly. I would have loved to just teleport for like a day and then come back to use a real bathroom, right? But like the thought that the Middle Ages were probably very much like the Wild West, where there were a very small group of people you trusted. Everyone else was probably trying to take advantage of you, or easily could because of the lack of law. And I know I'm making sweeping generalizations over a period of history that lasted for like 1,000 years, so I'm sure it differed based on the locale. But kind of going with that interpretation, kind of trying to say it's a Western without the Western accent. They definitely pulled it off.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I didn't know you had written a tone document. I think you had mentioned you wanted it to be a little bit like a Western before. And I think that was even in one of my comments about a particular scene. But yeah, no, seeing that you wrote you took the time to write a tone document kind of shows through. I think everyone was playing that well. Very subdued, respectful, but not inhuman. And I think that came mm-hmm. through.
Yeah, it was interesting because I think it was coming off of The Mandalorian. It must have been Mandalorian season 2 was just coming out when I was starting to really think about this project. And I'm like, how are they getting us to root for a guy with a bucket on his head who says nothing, you know. And then I thought, well, yeah, that's pretty much what Clint Eastwood is in all of his films, you know. And I remember telling the team, because they were like, why are we doing this project? Don't we need the main character to be funny and have those relatable comic moments, you know, like all those stereotypical tropes? Or as the screenwriter Blake Snyder says, he needs to save the cat. You know, you need these typical screenwriter gags. And I said, well, you know, Aragorn and Clint Eastwood got away with it because they're pretty much just really handsome and cool.
I mean, that's Steven. And Steven fits the bill, yeah.
Right. So, and they were like, all right, we'll see if that works. So I'm glad to hear step one, I guess,
think
check.
One thing I noticed is you still get the connection with the main character, the Aeneas, even if it's not through constant quippy dialogue or something like that. But this was something I had texted you as I was watching it, that you know, I was like, oh, this kind of reminds me of like a quest from The Witcher or something, like a little side quest.
Yes.
And I think what you kind of do is, as you watch the film and you follow Aeneas on his little journey, you get to see him in action, and he does things, and you kind of show, just being there with him, I think, makes you kind of like him, because you're kind of a companion, even if there isn't this kind of constant kind of like winking at the camera sort of feeling.
Right. I remember constructing the plot with there were a team of students that I met with and kind of just hashed a few ideas out with. And from the beginning, we wanted it to be episodic because it feels, given the characterization, I think it demands an episodic approach. Because you're right, that's the only way we'll get to know him, is if we put him in these little pods, these circumstances that are almost divorced from each other. Like, there is the meta-narrative, but I kind of need to see him with a girl and how he deals with that situation. Then I need to see him with a competitor, and then I need to see him with somebody who's like worse than him, you know. And so we designed those episodes specifically looking for story events that would expose or illuminate a kind of different side of him. So I'm kind of curious how people like my father will react to the film, who are like, he's a more nuanced moviegoer, but he definitely expects the more like stock standard experience. So you know, when we spend 6 minutes of the film like randomly in the middle, he's like helping some lady find her horse, and it has nothing to do with the meta narrative until it does, you know. But at first it feels like a waste of time, and I'm just curious how normal moviegoers will go, or how you felt about the episodic nature and its ability to keep your interest.
Well, I think I think we had talked, maybe this was a year ago or 6 months ago, maybe it was when you were writing this or shooting it, you're talking about Arthurian legend, and I think there's nothing more episodic than Arthurian legend.
Yeah.
It's just it's something that you think about and you're like, yeah, sure, I guess they're kind of episodes, and then you read any of it and you're like, wow, this is really random. It's just like, this guy went over there and did this thing, and you know, I think so. Yeah. I don't think it goes that far. Like, I think even the little episodes do plug into the meta narrative and serve the overarching goal. Well, I don't think there's ever a moment where I was like, why would he go over there and do that? But I really like what you said. I was just thinking about that, about how you're kind of putting him in like next to different sorts of people and different sort of situations to see how he reacts. And I was actually looking at the Robert McKee book, Story, after I watched it. I was thinking about it, and one thing that stood out to me that I had underlined before that I thought was applicable was, he says something like, yeah, there's this temptation when you're crafting a character to just give him a bunch of quirks as if that's a character. And so it's like, oh, a good character is just a really quirky guy, so he has half a dozen quirks. And he's like, no, a really good character is someone who has one thing. but you see that one thing come out over and over again in different ways through different situations. So I thought that was like, when you were saying that, I'm like, yeah, that's spot on to what I was just reading
Awesome.
about the story Bible. So
Yeah, I must have just internalized that from Robert.
I would not surprise if it subconsciously is in your brain
I
the
do
entirety
love
of the
him.
book.
Though, I just started reading his chief rival competitor, Blake Snyder. Like, Robert McKee is such a philosopher, the way he expands upon story and screenwriting. And Blake Snyder is like, on page 5, you have to make a joke. On page 6, you have to introduce the love interest. It's like so pop Hollywood. And I really like them both. There's a place for both in those styles. But anyway, you tell us more. Like, what are you seeing as an upward trend maybe in our movies? Like, okay, Iron Dusk compared to the others, it's getting better here. And then what are some, I don't know, are there any snakes in the grass or just consistent low points that we're not doing a good job of growing through or avoiding?
This director is just
well, there's no getting rid of me, so
as I was texting you, the imagery of certain shots are just amazing. I mean, Austin, I'm thinking about your animation back to the Sailfish Cup of your freshman year. So I think
wow.
I've witnessed your animation skills just take off over the years. But like I was texting you, I was like, "Oh, is this ceiling of the cathedral stock footage of some cathedral? It doesn't look like
the
St.
highest
Augustine."
compliment."
And you're like, "It was fake. I made it all up in graphic design." And I was like, "Wow!" I even went back and watched it again, knowing that, and I was like, I could not tell the difference.
Awesome.
There are, and even things where I knew it was animated, it still looked really good. Like the castle in the distance, superimposed in the sky, looked great. I mean, so much of it looked, and I mean, the best thing I can say is, because I mean, obviously you guys aren't an animation studio, but is that it never really takes you out of it. Even if there's a point where you're like, okay, my brain knows that's not real. It's not like, oh, now I can't watch the movie, or now I'm taken out of it and not paying attention anymore. So it's not disruptive in any way. That I think that's been, but there was moments where even when I knew it was animated, I could not spot it. I was like, that's definitely that's huge.
That's a huge compliment. And there are times, if you watch a Star Wars movie now, your brain, you may actually be taken out of the story and think yeah, well, that shot of the Star Destroyer is fully animated. So knowing that something is animated doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad and it's taking you out of the narrative. And I think that's exactly what I've been hoping for as my skills improve. I'm like, there's no way I'm tricking people into thinking that this city actually exists. It doesn't, there's no subtropical medieval castle, so they just know. But if I can at least make it lovely enough that it services the plot enough that you're not frustrated by that reality, but instead you accept it, I think that's in some ways the best we can hope for with the limitations of technology that we have nowadays. So thanks for saying that. That warms my heart.
Yeah, that's just one thing that stuck out. Because I've been watching your media for a long time.
Yeah, for over 10 years.
You didn't have
now.
access to the same sort of technology or team of people working on it. But that's relatively minor, but that's a production value thing. What else stuck out? I mean,
and to credit just Kavanaugh for a second, the locations that we did have that were real were beautiful, and it's because she did so much work, our producer, to get us to St. Augustine and to convince them to let us film in the Castillo for free. So the non-animated shots that were beautiful because they were real, just credit to the producer who worked so hard on that.
That was the other thing I saw. I'm pretty sure a lot of it was at Bethesda by the Sea.
Yes,
in their gardens. And that was the one thing. This is a compliment / not critique, but this is my unfair
a double header
critique of you. Yeah.
Yes.
What I noticed is, and this is not something I really thought about until I was watching, and I just realized how much establishing shots in and around the environment that the actors are in, really sets and like puts you in the moment and makes you think this is a fully immersive sort of realized world. And a lot of the shots with the volume where it's kind of, one shot, one close up, and then reverse shot.
Yeah.
Like I thought, especially maybe I noticed it more this time because you have done more to give me as the viewer more of the real life thing, the establishment shots, like the shots of her riding the horse. I thought the Bethesda by the Sea stuff was great because I'm like, oh, they're in the garden, and like you can you can pan the camera around, you can show more. And it just made me think like this is a really unfair critique to Austin to be like, well, why don't you have a dozen or 5 dozen different locations with all these different props and all these different background characters and to really fully flesh this out to make me believe I'm there. It's an unfair critique, but it was one thing I would encourage you if you can find that space to do it. Like to pull back out of the kind of the flatter kind of reverse shot. And I know you also had some other constraints regarding time with certain actors. So I know that's another reason it's unfair, is that you were kind of, editing shots together in a way that I knew, having some background information, that they weren't, real in a certain way.
Right.
So,
right. And we could share what you're talking about. In one sense is Dean Cain, who is in the film, and he's in a few scenes, like maybe 4 or 5, but we only had him for 4 hours. So we're like shooting him independent of other people one day, and then we're shooting the other half of the conversations, weeks later. And so we can't actually get a full shot of all of the characters involved. So that's part of what you're saying, right?
Mm-hmm. I didn't want to spoil.
No, he's on the poster, so people know he's in it. But on the other hand, I think what you're saying is incredibly true, and it's something that we're tracking. So to break it down a little bit, and you tell me if I'm off here. I'm just kind of going to restate what you said with some more technicality. Our LED volume is in a studio. And we shoot a lot of our interiors, there if we don't have a quite exactly what we need from a location, or sometimes we'll shoot the outside scenes at a real castle, but then the inside is all abandoned, and so we do the inside on the LED wall or something like that. But because the room is quite small and it costs a lot of money to get set pieces like real nightstands and banners and flooring. That's a huge one, Daniel, that most people don't think about, is like, we have a black floor in the studio. So like, how are we going to show like a marble floor? And then disguising the lip of the stage, the physical stage, into the LED wall digital floor. Because the LED level will give you a marble floor. Even if we paid to have a marble floor installed on our stage, how do you seamlessly blend between both the digital asset and the fake asset in a wide shot that shows head to toe everybody in the room? Plus the challenge of your camera's depth of field, which is the blurriness of the background, basically. If we're wide and you can see everything, you might actually see the pixels of the LED wall rather than it being blended in the way it naturally is in a close-up. So wide shots that establish geography and location are really, really challenging for the LED wall specifically. And it's very obvious to notice what we shot on the volume versus what we shot on a real location, because the real location, we're going for wide shots and stuff like that. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay.
And maybe part of it is because I've been to your stage, I've seen it, I know what to expect. But I think it's also maybe just like, even if I barely noticed it, my brain did sort of situation.
Right.
Because I watched a movie with Stephanie later that night after I kind of realized this, and all I was doing was like watching for, okay, the scene's transitioning. Oh, look, they're setting, oh, there's the wide shot. Oh, and now they're circling around the room. And if they're going to come in close, they're going to do it. They're going to move the camera around. You're going to see all. And so I think that was part. I was like, oh, okay. I think I did notice something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we're actually tracking with you. I'm like really glad that this was something you brought up, because it's confirming to me that like we're on the right track, noticing what some of our weaknesses are. We've decided to, for our next project, just throw out entirely the hope of getting the floor to merge with the wall properly, and instead we're going to do a green screen floor and potentially even backdrop for the wide shots that were completely lacking in Iron Dusk. And just leave it up to digital keying, because we saw that the fully animated shots were coming out okay. Basically, if you've seen the behind the scenes for like Star Wars Episode 2 and 3, where everything is blue screened, there's a place for that. So for shooting our next movie, if we're going to show the floor, we're not going to be afraid of it. We're just going to know that's going to be a green screen shot. Then when we come in for the over the shoulders, the close up shot, reverse shot, that's where we'll turn on the LED wall to function the way it's supposed to. There's more than that. There's also like camera height, which we've never played with, but in the studio, because we didn't have the tech, so we're getting a crane to help get some more variety there. But like we're working on a new solution basically for our next project that I hope will bring the diversity that's currently lacking in those studio shots. So wish us luck, because that's a lot more to deal with in editing.
Ambitious,
a
lot more.
But we think it's right. But rather than spending $50,000 on a floor, to be seen, I think it's the best use of our resources. So I don't know.
And I don't know. Oh, yeah, that makes total sense. And that's why I was like, this is an unfair criticism given your situation. But I was wondering, I don't know if this is helpful or if it only make the problem worse. But I was thinking, like, to give an example, I think it's Bethesda by the Sea, where she's walking down the hallway with her sister in the outdoor hallway, Femina, and I think this happens twice, where she runs into the other knight, and this was a real location, on location, but I think both times it was shot straight down the hallway, and the camera doesn't move, and they're walking in, and I was thinking, when you do have the opportunity in these real locations to go to move the camera around some more and make it feel a little bit like different sorts of angles, I don't know if that would draw more attention to the fact it's not happening other places, or if it would help give it to me a little bit when I have the chance to have it. I don't know. In the end, it might be more jarring. It might be like, it's better to be consistently closer to the middle than to have, anytime we're on location, we're super dynamic.
Right,
and we're back to the flat,
Well, it's funny you say that, because like I that was some criticism leveled from Christy, our art director. She kept getting lovingly frustrated with me for keeping things simple, and I think on Iron Dusk I was shooting conservative in one sense, not just out of like laziness, because moving the camera takes work. You got to set up the dolly, you got to do lots of things. And it is 110 degrees out in Florida in the summer.
Don't forget.
But it was more that I thought it complemented the tone, to bring it back to that this is supposed to be a very simple Knight's Tale where the dialogue is curt and gritty, and so are the camera movements, or really lack thereof. So I thought it was motivated, but our next film is more of I'm taking a lot of inspiration from Star Trek 2009, the J.J. Abrams stuff, and like you see the camera like floating through those environments because it's all in space. It's really dynamic, and I think you're right. It probably would contrast too starkly if we're always moving the camera in real locations and never moving it in the digital world. But more this is the issue, is like to do a complex camera move, even a not like an insanely complex one, but like one that takes a little bit of, you got to move the camera, pan it at the same time, and get focus right. Probably takes like triple to quadruple the amount of takes that a tripod shot takes. So in the time that it takes us to do one complex shot, we could have done 4 regular shots. And I don't always know how to wager that because we are limited by time. I don't know. I got to think about that.
Yeah, that's why I said it was unfair, but
no, it's not though, because I think if you're noticing it, it's the filmmaker, we're always striving to create the most translucent experience. Is that the right word? Like the mechanics that go into making a movie should be absolutely transparent to the audience, where you're not noticing them, you're not seeing them. All you're seeing is right through the technique to the story. So like my dream is to get to a point where people are only complaining about the story, with these movies. Not the color grading, the focus, the animation, like that would be such a great sign for our growth. But tell us, let's talk a little bit about the story without getting into spoilers just yet. You influenced it, of course, but so we could speak to those elements. I guess we can't get too specific pre-spoilers. Maybe as far as the theme goes, the culmination of the theme, the characterization, the drama, did it flow in a logical and engaging way, or were there any things that were not so fun?
That's always, I feel like, the thing I always am on. Maybe if you have a guy for something, I think I'm the guy who just reads it for the logical consistency, and then I go, no, why that? I think there was even one tiny thing in this was like, oh, and the original script was like, Aeneas gets kicked in the shin, and I was like, but he's got armor on. Why would he? It was just like, so,
I forgot about that.
That's like the level of stuff I usually read for. I think it all. Because I hadn't read this script and talked to you about it in like a year. Mm-hmm. So I watched it and I was kind of like, oh yeah, I remember that. Like, but some of the tweaks were in there that I hadn't, that weren't in the first draft. I was like, oh, that's different than I remember from the first read. And overall, I remembered most of the twists, so those weren't like surprising, but it all flowed together. It made sense. I think, like I had mentioned before, not only was the tone a little bit more like subdued, but I think the pacing in this one is slower in a good way, in the sense that this is probably the one that I stuck out as the most, like, every character is developed well and at a good pace. There's like no rushing, and there's no like moment where this guy's evil and then, oh, never mind, I changed my mind, now I'm good all of a sudden. Like, there's I think all of that was very intentionally baked in from like scene one to the final scene. That whole character arc for not just Aeneas but minor characters with their different ups and downs, when I think they all come to a logical end and it's all very believable. And I think none of them are hyper caricatured in any way, so that the believableness isn't because it's so obvious what they are. It's like, or it's organic in the way they change, even though it's not just everyone is static. Like, this person is this, has this alignment and scene one, therefore. So I think that was the pacing of the character arcs. I think you did a good job picking the amount of people to develop. And so it's not like you have a whole bunch of, you have too many characters and no one's developed, or, just the protagonist is developed or something. I think you did a good job of picking, like, not just the protagonist, but a nice core group of, 4 or 5 characters around him who all are more fleshed out. And then, maybe an outer ring of characters who are just kind of, tertiary. But I think it speaks to the fact that not just the protagonist, but his ring of secondary characters are all very fleshed out, all very real. They all develop in an organic way and believable.
Thank you. That's a high compliment, and I could break down a little bit of how that happened, because it was a different sort of writing process on this one that allowed for that. One thing I would say is that actually casting really illuminated the depth that some of these guys could bring to their characters. So some of them were intended to be a little more two-dimensional, but then we saw in the auditions like, oh, this is an interesting version of the character that I hadn't considered. Let me revisit the script. So like that was one thing that maybe motivated changes. Two, everyone in the studio that we workshopped it with, like my team we've been working together now for like 4 years, most of us at least, they were all so lovingly critical of how brief I write and how conservative I write. I'm just always assuming, and I think you had the same comment probably, like I'm always assuming that people are bored and want to move on.
We're so opposite in our faults when it comes to writing. I just never stop. And Steven's like, sometimes it's better just to throw everything out and just not have it. And I'm like, okay, Steven. Austin's like, well, we've been here he said 3 words. We should probably move on. And I'm like, yeah, you should slow down.
And it shows in the literature we read too. I mean, like you love Dostoevsky and Solzhenitsyn, you know, and I try so hard to like read them. And then I'm like, I'm going to read Narnia again for the 16th time. But I think really it just comes from my father, who like, you know, I love him so much, but he's so blue collar, ADD, you know, and my entire childhood was like, okay, how do I communicate this really quickly so that Dad gets it, you know? And I still write that way. So everyone's like yelling at me about that, or it feels like it, especially with the romance. They were like, you need to slow down and get me to like root for these guys. So I'm like, okay, like what do I do? Like a dinner conversation that's awkward with her dad? And like I think I said it exactly that way, and they were like, "Yes!" And
yes.
So suddenly 3 more minutes are added to the film.
Austin's like, "But I already had him break that thing off the wall, so you relate to him."
Yes,
come on,
Pirates
what
of the
more could you
Caribbean.
want? Move on.
Right. I'm like, I'm so concise, aren't I? It's so good. It's a virtue. No, it's not. Well, not always. So that was like one thing. People, you and the other, you know, team members were really great in rooting for me to slow down. And then there was a third thing. I don't know if I shared this with you. There were a couple of days where we had an abundance of time, which is usually not the case on these projects. But one of them was in St. Augustine. One was in pickups. One was like in the middle of the film. And the night before, or even, you know, in St. Augustine, it was actually at the coffee shop where we were taking a 15-minute break before we were going to head over to the castle again. I said, well, we've got an extra hour and we've got these guys here and they're in their heavy armor already. So I just started writing new scenes. And most of those were about the subplots, because obviously the A plot is accounted for in the screenplay. So I'm just sitting here wondering, you know, like, well, I've got my 2 guys here and, well, you know, what might the audience want to know about them? So I'm literally writing new scenes to film up until the second to last day of production. And some of those became my favorite scenes because I think they do what you're saying, which is give life and dimension to characters that otherwise might have felt like caricatures. So I think I just need to keep that in mind for the next couple projects, and maybe bill in that time.
Thanks again for joining us today. If you enjoyed our content, consider subscribing. Studio 70 is a division of the King's Academy, a K-12 private Christian school in West Palm Beach, Florida. For more information, visit studio70.tv or tka.net.